Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Interfaith Insights, which is a programme that shows how faith can motivate people from all walks of life to do positive things in the world. And as always, we have a whole wide range of opinions and views on this show that do not all necessarily represent the Edinburgh Interfaith Association, so we're aware of that. Remember, please, you can follow more of our interviews on the Edinburgh Interfaith Facebook page or on our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on Twitter at Eden Interfaith. Now, as ever, we are joined by our lovely co-hosts Naseem Azad and Professor Joe Goldblatt. And today we have a really fantastic show lined up today. Last week we had a great show, which was youth leaders, what you call a youth quake, where the youth took over last week's show. And it was just an absolutely tremendous show, so well received. We had a lot of viewers last week. I think there was about 5,500 people tuned in last week. So we will have another youth quake on the 18th of August. We will again be replaced by a wonderful panel with Josh co-presenting again. As always, we start with some positive news stories. I've picked out a couple, but I will then ask our co-presenters, even if any guests want to chip in with some stories. The first one I wanted to mention, which has captured people's imagination, that they had over 2 million views, was the marriage between teenage sweethearts Michelle and Amit Patel from Croydon. Their wedding has attracted over 2 million views virtually. And it's really given that kind of positive view of bicultural union of interracial marriage. And I think a lot of people have been connecting with them and speaking about that, what it's like as a couple. So I just wanted to put that as a really beautiful story. And you can actually come across, you can watch their, I think, 5-minute video online, #India meets Ghana, gives you an indication of their background. Very beautiful. I want to give a call out also to a friend of mine, Shabir Beg, OBE, who I've been watching so many videos in the last 2 weeks of him dropping off food supplies to homeless charities across Glasgow, including Help the Homeless, giving vital supplies to people in need at this time. And I should also mention that the organisation, of course, that Shabir Beg is a part of, as the chair of the Scottish Ahlul-Bayt Society, that they have also started a new initiative working with the Scottish National Blood Transfusion Service, just to get this right, which is about encouraging people to donate convalescent plasma, which can help people who are seriously ill to recover from COVID-19. So it's really a really important piece of work that they are doing, just to acknowledge that. And finally, I just wanted to update, of course, Joe, you recently became a grandfather. And
Aye, thank you.
Acknowledge that. Wonderful. How is the latest addition to the Goldblatt family?
Well, thank you for asking. We're doing our best to increase the population of Scotland, one grandchild at a time. His name is Guthrie, and he has joined his big brother Hamish, and they're all doing well. But since you spoke of Shabir Beg, our dear blessed friend who earned his OBE this past year as well, I think we should also give a shout out to Captain Sir Tom, who was knighted by Her Majesty the Queen at Windsor Castle earlier this week, and upon receiving his knighthood at the ripe young age of 100 years, the first thing he did was give credit to everyone else. Now that's faith in action as far as I'm concerned. It's humility.
That's wonderful. Does anyone else have any other positive story they want to share just before we go on?
Just something I'd like to say that, as you will have seen from the government last week, was the places of worship were allowed to be open. So Friday was the first day that mosques across Edinburgh, and I'm sure many other, not Edinburgh, sorry, Scotland, and many other places of worship were open. But it was quite interesting to see, because I was behind the scenes, how much actual work went into that, creating the register, plotting the wee dots where everybody could stand, because there's a maximum capacity taking into account the 2-meter distance. So there's a lot of work that went into that, but it was just strange to see that now that is the norm. But the reason I'm just mentioning that is that because we need to kind of upkeep that. There's been so many mosques and places of worship in England that have opened, but then they've had to reclose because of, you know, people not paying proper attention to the guidelines. So it's great news, but, you know, we have to keep it up. We have to maintain that distancing, and, you know, bring your own prayer mats, wear masks, keep distance, and just listen to the volunteers. They're there for your safety and the others. So just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's great that people are able to attend their places of worship again. Many people have been telling me they've been missing that sense of community that has been lost. Although we've had more community in a sense, we connect people virtually. For many, it's not quite the same. But we just have to be aware that, you know, we're at the early stages still of coming out of this virus, and we don't want anything that will maybe accelerate it or bring back a second spike. And so the government guidelines are really important. I think that the Scottish Government here has been working really hard to ensure that the right steps are taken. And I've been attending weekly meetings with government representatives just to ensure that, you know, we emerge at the right time and all the right precautions are being taken. So that's great. Thank you for raising that. Right, anyway, turning to today's wonderful show. Today we are looking at the wonderful topic of faith and art, and we have the most brilliant guest today to talk about that. Now, during lockdown, many of us have been unleashing our creativity. Maybe some of us have been painting for the first time, or have been trying something else, you know, creative. Recently, we had Claire Garbedian, a wonderful celloist, on the show, reminding us 2 weeks ago that, you know, art is a form of prayer. It can be used to express our inner longings, frame our hopes for the future, and we want to see more of that being created and encouraged as we emerge from lockdown. And so one of the things that we were thinking would be wonderful if you, the viewers, could send in your favourite piece. It could be a painting, a poem, a drawing, it could even be a dance, and we could feature that in an episode next month. And one of our wonderful artists who's with us, who we'll introduce shortly, Payam, will judge some of the best of the artwork that comes in, which is wonderful. So we're going to start today with Naseem. Naseem has a wonderful artist with her. He's an Edinburgh-based artist and is a musician, Payam Beint. His work looks at the idea of how painting can be used as a means of recording memory and the peripheral vision and non-static visitors of a journey. So wonderful. Can't wait to hear more about his artwork, and maybe we'll get to see some examples of that. So over to Naseem and Payam.
Thanks very much, Ian. And a warm welcome, Payam, to the show. I really appreciate, you know, taking part. And I've been checking out your art on your Instagram page and your Facebook page. It's just truly magnificent. And it's so, you always think when somebody paints something, where does that come from? What does it actually mean? So I think the first question I want to ask is how, you know, what, you want to tell me a bit about tell us a bit about yourself first, and where that kind of talent comes from? What inspires that?
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm very happy to be on the show today. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yeah, I mean, really, I think if I go back to the beginning, I think I was brought up in a family that there was a lot of there were a lot of artists, particularly on my mum's side of the family. So my mum is Persian and my dad's English, and I was brought up as a Baha'i as well, from both my parents are Baha'is. And my mother's maiden name is Roshan, which means bright light.
It does.
And I always thought that was kind of a very fitting name for a family that has so much sort of poetic and artistic influence in what they do as well. So I always felt like the name was quite special in itself. And you know, as a child, I kind of looked up to my family on my Persian side, who were already really doing really wonderful things with the arts. And my mum also chants and has a very beautiful voice when she sings as well. So I felt like I was kind of immersed in arts from my sort of early childhood. And then I studied, when I studied at school, I really realized quite early on that I really wanted to be an artist. I felt like I was always doodling and drawing all the time, and it kind of became more and more serious as I grew up. So I went to art school and studied contemporary art in Nottingham. And that really kind of opened my eyes up to not only just, you know, painting as an art form, but also other visual forms as well. So I was able to kind of experiment with music and sound and photography and movement and all sorts of other things as well. And so that kind of broadened my palette in terms of how I wanted to work as an artist as well. And that also kind of took away the barrier of art being this kind of linear thing of being a painter or being a musician. You know, I kind of could see the overlap in all these different disciplines. When I graduated from Nottingham, I then actually trained to be a teacher. So I trained to teach art in secondary schools. And so that's what I did for a number of years, full time. I was teaching art in both the schools in Oxford, in London. And whilst I was doing that, I was continuing my artistic practice. So I was kind of trying to develop my own artistic ability, because I always felt like as a teacher of children, one of the important things is that you have to be, also you have to show it by example what you do rather than just words. So I felt like if I were to be valid as a teacher, I had to be an artist as well, to show that my passion and love was there. It wasn't just being a teacher, it was about showing the children that I taught the love and what I gained from it, so that hopefully they would be also inspired and it would enrich their lives as well. So I felt like you know, and I think when you speak to a lot of teachers, they would say the same thing, that it's, as a profession, it's something that you learn so much more from than that, you know, as much as the children do as well. And also there's this huge responsibility, I think, when you're teaching, that you feel like what you say and what you do could influence lives and could actually shape people's futures. So I always felt like it's always been a, you know, thing I've loved doing. It's been a huge responsibility, but also something that I feel has sort of shaped me as an artist as well, that it's not only about me creating, but it's also about giving back and sharing my own ideas that I gain as I go along the way. So that kind of brought me to moving to Edinburgh a few years ago. And when I moved up to Edinburgh, one thing I was really wanted to do, it's kind of a life ambition, was to actually do a master's and to actually specifically study at the Glasgow School of Art. And I think one of the reasons for this was that I had, as a teacher, I'd often been quite in awe of artists that had come through the Glasgow School of Art, and loved the, you know, the Macintosh building, and also just so much about it to me was, you know, I wanted to feel like I could get some inspiration and be a part of that incredible history. So I was fortunate enough to get a place there, and last year I spent a full-time study of my master's in fine art and painting. And during that time, I think what really helped me to refine what I do was, I think the master's taught me to think about an artist, about how you say something and communicate an idea through your work, and how research then feeds into that idea so that you can express an idea very strongly and communicate with people. So I think that to me was quite an empowering thing to do, and to help me on my sort of artistic journey, which I always see as this constantly ongoing thing. So since then I've been in Edinburgh, and I've kind of set up my own studio at home, and I've been kind of in a way continuing the momentum of my master's study to develop the ideas in my work. And I'm currently teaching as well part-time. So I have a job now where I work part-time, and I'm teaching art to children with special education needs. So the children that I work with have learning disabilities and autism. And for me, it's been a wonderful challenge to kind of find ways of enriching artwork for children with learning needs and autism. And actually, in a way, that's also been very good for me, because I'm trying to see my approach to art through the children's eyes as well. And when children have autism and they're looking at things in a sensory way, it's almost made me reapproach the medium of paint itself and what it means to them, and then how that can then feed into my own painting practice as well.
Can I just ask something, because you've given me lots of information there. So many questions emerging from your conversation there, from your input there. One of the things you've mentioned, that you were teaching art, but then at the same time you were being taught art. You know, you said you were teaching in England, then you went as a student to the Glasgow College of Art. what I wanted to know, and this is purely for me, but is how restrictive is that? I mean, when you're being taught something, is it only what the teacher knows, or is it what you, or do you, when, you know, for example, when you're teaching your students, is it only what you know, or do you see talent and you help them develop that? And vice versa, when somebody's teaching you, that may not be what you want to develop on. Do you feel that that's quite restrictive?
That's a really good question. I think when, as a teacher, speaking from a sort of teacher perspective, I was always conscious of the fact that I didn't want to impose my personal taste and ideas on students I work with, and that actually trying to help children to develop their inner artist, and they are all artists, the children that you work with from day one, is that you're guiding, but you're not, and you're sharing knowledge, but you're not imposing your ideas and views. And I kind of think that's an essence of teaching and learning, is that you are, maybe your job is to open doors and to for children to see things that inspire them, but not to also try to push them in a direction that doesn't allow them to truly express their artistic potential. So it's very true, you're right, in a way that's something you have to be very mindful of when teaching, is that you are a guide, and you're not a person who your job there is to kind of shape and mold their artistic identity.
Yeah, and that sounds fantastic. And when we were having a conversation just the other day, you mentioned, and I know Ian mentioned it today as well, about the memory and the paintings that are derived from that. So do you want to, I mean, I think maybe Josh is going to probably bring up onto the screen some paintings that you've done, and I found them so moving. And you know, people say, what do you read in that? But you know, each person has a different perspective. It invokes something different in me. It make you feel completely different to somebody else. But I found them really moving. So talking about memory, what was the kind of connection with memory and paintings?
Sure. So it's interesting because, to kind of put a bit of context to the work that I do, I was, first of all, I was thinking about, when I was working, the idea of memory kind of played an important role in the work that I'm doing. And
just to say that, you know, I hope everybody can see that on the screen there. The paintings have Josh has just brought them up, and this is Payam's Instagram page, and they're absolutely beautiful. Sorry to interrupt, Payam.
Yeah, no, that's quite okay. So you'll notice you can see that in the paintings you've got images of portraits that seem to be very faded and kind of abstracted. And these were things that I did when I was in Glasgow last year. And the idea was actually, interestingly, it was about using sound and image together, and also people's stories. And I thought that was kind of important. So what I did as a starting point was to ask people if they could remember a journey that they had with their father when they were very young, and that recollection, it was the recollection of that story was recorded as an audio story, but then I also painted the person that told the story, but in a way that was faded through time. And I kind of looked at old greats, great painters and masters, and the techniques that they used with subtle plays of light. But then I also was interested in the idea of taking layers off the painting and then repainting them again, and then taking it off again and adding, in the same way that memories are affected by time and the way that your experience affects your memory of things. So when people saw the exhibition, they would see a series of paintings of people that would be hard to make out, but also there'd be something there that would be sort of real underneath these layers of mist. But you would also be listening as well to people's stories. And the idea of a journey is a theme that has run through some of my paintings, as well as my landscape work as well, and still life work. And I think the starting point actually of that journey, the idea of momentum and journey, interestingly, was a number of years ago I went to an exhibition that was at the British Museum in London, and it was an exhibition of Baha'u'llah's, who's the founder of the Baha'i faith, his writing. And his writing was a form of calligraphy, and it was said that when it was revealed, it was written very, very quickly because the words seemed to be just flowing. And I was really taken by not only the beauty of this writing, but the idea of this, that when you looked at the writing, there was almost a movement that was almost visibly moving on the page. And so as a painter, I'd sort of often painted things that were static, like landscapes. And it got me thinking about the idea of how do you depict movement and rapidity in painting, where paintings aren't static, they're moving, there's a dynamism to them. And so I thought my starting point, interestingly, became that on my commute between Edinburgh and Glasgow on the bus, I would record lots of sketches and drawings of the blurring scenery going by as I was traveling on my bus journey. And then I kind of tried to create paintings that had multiple perspectives and viewpoints that became what I would call non-static landscape. So it was like a different way of working. So in a way, when you look at the portraits, they are sort of an extension of that idea of non-static landscape, where you've got a picture of somebody that appears to be almost moving, but still at the same time. So yeah, so that kind of, those are sort of some of the themes that I've been exploring really with my paintings.
I see that you've mentioned your faith, Baha'i, and I see that you've merged your faith and your exceptional talent, and you've produced some beautiful, beautiful work. But I love how you talked about memories, because memories, you know, everybody has memories. It's something everybody can relate to, good or bad. They're very important. And these pictures, to me, say that that's a visual representation of memories of people that you've spoken to. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, the work that I did on the portraits, I called them antecedents portraits, and that word is just about what makes us who we are, right? Our identity, what's been before us, and what's kind of made us who we are. So I felt like the stories, when you listen to them, they give a little bit of that person's life and their relationship, but they also kind of are like a sort of a window into who we are. And so I kind of always thought with painting that it's important that when you're in a way developing your practice, that you are reflecting what's around you, that you are as an artist, you're a reflection of your environment and people around you. So in some ways the paintings are like reflections or like mirrors almost that you're looking into.
Well, you know, you're I just love hearing how the true artists and the ones that have talent, you know, they take inspiration from anything, even from a bus journey between Edinburgh to Glasgow. I think that's just so inspiring. So thank you so much, Payam, for coming along today and showing us your great work and speaking about things very personal to you. We really do appreciate that. And we will share the links on Aoife's Facebook page. Thank you very much. It was a really honor speaking with you this afternoon, sorry. Thank you. Back to you, Ian.
Well done.
Fantastic. Such inspiring artwork. And I think we will make some connections when I talk to my two special guests that we're bringing in all the way, joining us very early in the morning from New York. I'm very pleased to welcome acclaimed writer, composer Mer Mansour and Broadway star, renowned playwright Nancy Nelson Ewing. Many people, of course, in Scotland will know you for the inspirational Henry Box Brown, the musical, which, if you haven't seen, you really need to see it. I had the privilege a couple of years ago coming along and seeing such a powerful show, and I think it was a standing ovation from everyone who was there. And if you don't know that, it's the musical which tells the story of an 1850s enslaved Virginian man who shipped himself to freedom in a box with the help of an African-American and white abolitionist. It's just such an incredible story. Before I talk to a guest, let's see a short trailer from Henry Box Brown, the musical. That trailer hopefully will come just in a second.
And I will sing for you.
And in between, I will sing a couple of songs.
There we go.
I was trying to remember the words to the song. Right?
There we go.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
I once was We need to bring our communities, our colleges, our schools, our cities, north, south, east, and west. We need to come together. We need to have this conversation.
All of God's children need to hold on. Hold on.
I could not help when I was sitting there to have tears in my eyes and to reclaim my own heritage, given the fact that I was born in Savannah, Georgia, and my great-grandparents were slaves.
Truth has been hidden for so long, and I trust that the state that we're in right now, people are looking for truth, they're looking for hope, they're looking for peace, they're looking for real love.
It was cruel how the slaves had to be taken away, how Henry got taken away from his mother and his sisters and all his siblings and everybody.
For the ones that are from the North and the young children, it's so powerful for them to really see and understand some of the issues that had taken place. Just the idea of what people actually went through on both sides of the fence.
And then you get the white folks who are coming out and you're going, oh my gosh, I don't want to be like that. Those were probably my ancestors. And now what do I have? What do I do now? In the middle of the play, there was a point where Henry goes to the shop owner.
I will help you to your freedom, Henry. And you will help me to mine.
Your freedom, sir.
Not all bondage is in chains.
Hold on. Just a little while.
I would recommend it. It's awesome. They don't understand what it actually means, but after seeing this play, you understand what slavery was and how hard it was for people.
Thought-provoking, influential, a worthwhile experience.
Gave me a perspective on, how racism still affects America now. What can I do to change it?
Wish I could share all that is, all the love that's in my heart. Remove the hate, the pain and fear.
And just hearing that music just touched my heart. And everything came together. The understanding, the pain and suffering became even more real.
I cried. I had a bunch of connections with all of those people there.
I think if everybody came and saw this, there wouldn't be any racism. Like, it could totally change everything.
I was speechless. I shed some tears.
Wonderful, wonderful. So welcome, Mihar, and welcome, Nancy. I have to say, just watching that clip brought back emotion for me, having actually been in that audience. And my wife was with me at the time, and she's from Rwanda, and I think she connected in different levels with that musical. And I think it was interesting. I was just speaking there, just thinking about what Payam was talking about in terms of his art being like a journey for people. And just as I was watching, I was being reminded that Henry Box Brown is a journey. You go on a journey with these characters, and you go on a journey from, and we'll come on as we talk about the moral teachings in the story, because sometimes we often paint things in black and white as well. But actually, some of the characters that huge change. Before we talk about the journey that we led to in Henry Box Brown, can you talk to me a little bit about your career and what led you to the journey of, being involved with Henry Box Brown? How did it come about?
Yes, thank you so much for having us. Well, I'm originally from Iran and raised in England. Actually, went to boarding school in Worcestershire, China, Worcestershire sauce. That's how we would identify it back in the day. And ended up in University of California at Irvine, and then 25 years ago, and yes, I'm that old, I came to New York City. And on the journey of leaving Iran, I come from a family of writers, and actually political writers, we don't like to use that in my faith of the Baha'i faith, because we sort of think that politics can be divisive. But we had some prominent members of my family who were always looking to unpack the human condition in Iran, and got on the wrong side of the list. And my dad was a filmmaker, and my mom was a storyteller. She's writing now a book of short stories of all the experiences of prejudice that she experienced in Iran, and they're quite riveting. And I think I just was raised around storytellers. And coming to England, I feel like it was more of that. I mean, I grew up on Shakespeare as part of my, raising up in England, and felt very much common sort of traditions in this storytelling culture. And but because I'm a kind of a revolutionary baby, in the sense that we left Iran in a tumultuous time due to religious persecution, and for whatever reason, we felt unsafe. It seemed like theater and the idea of storytelling, I mean, it was clear to me that theater was a language of compassion in every way that I had seen it. And it was an expression of beauty, and that theater was being used as sort of wonderful, pacifying experience of escapist entertainment, but the power of it to offer us a tool for moral reasoning was lost on it. Oh, I have an Alexa alarm. Alexa, turn off the alarm. My 7-year-old is not as nice about it. She yells at Alexa a lot. Anyway, so so I really knew that there was a power in theater, and went to college and looked at the Brechtian model and the Egyptian theater and the Greek theater, and of course all of the roots of it from Africa. And I'd always thought that there was something there in terms of looking at how we can redefine the purpose of the arts, in terms of how we can create empathy and continue that dialogue. And when I came to wanting to start a children's theater, it would just seem like the safest place to write, because I never actually thought of myself as a writer. It's incredible to hear someone say my career. But yes, and in the process, we wrote over 15 musicals that were rooted in social change, positive social change, adapted some of them from existing children's books. But when I really found my home, it was really in the African American community in New York, who seemed to find alignment with the stories that I wanted to tell, and the way we wanted to look at social justice imperatives in our storytelling, and not just the traditional fairy tales and fables that are wonderful that the kids get, but I had trouble understanding why kids should be doing Chicago the musical in every school in America, or even which is murder, mayhem, alcohol. I don't know why any parent would want their kid to. I love Chicago. It sounds really entertaining. Or I love Les Miserables, the great Victor Hugo adaptation, but I couldn't understand why American students, especially any American student, African American or not, would be doing, French Revolution. Bless their hearts, but Victor Hugo is about, French Revolution. Isn't there any heroes, any triumph of the human spirit in the American history, let alone its darkest years and slavery? So I felt clearly that I'm from a foreign country and I shouldn't be going into taboo land. And obviously there's no slavery, the musical, there's no Holocaust, the musical, there's going to be no Ayatollah, the musical. So let's just stay away from all that. And I'm being facetious, but I just found it sort of interesting that the American school systems were not, first of all, there's like clearly missing chapters in the history books. That's not even news. The kids will tell you that. Last February in Time magazine, I read that 8% of American high school students even know that the basis of the Civil War in America was slavery. 8% of American schools. So that just, to me, that's like systemic right there. So, kept my nose out of it until the children who've been with us for now over 20 years were asking us for material that was more geared to their history. Where is our story? And I felt very sort of obliged to go and find where is the Les Mis of American history, and where are the heroes in their story. And again, didn't find much, but one day I bumped into a children's book called Henry's Freedom Box, and it was a picture book about a young boy who then grew up to be Henry Box Brown and put himself in a box and shipped himself to freedom after having been sold away from his parents, and then his children sold away from him and his wife and his pregnant wife. So I thought, well, if it's good enough for a children's picture book, it is good enough for us to quietly adapt it into a tiny little story with culture of music. It's not I dare say it's not a musical, because it is a culture of music, perhaps arguably where all music is rooted and inspired from, and decided to work on looking at Henry's own narrative. And so that was really where it all started, is unpacking Henry's own narrative, and this children's book that kind of gave us license, and thought we'd keep it quiet over in Harlem, Bronx, and Queens in New York, and no one has to know about it. So that's how it got started, and I really feel like I'm the wrong face for promoting, writing, but it just seemed to me that it just had to be done. It was out of a real need, and I don't want to go too much more into it, so we can get Nancy into it, but it really has been a journey, and indeed Henry's own journey has given us a lot of courage. Coming to Edinburgh was one of the highest points of it, not only because of all the accolades you saw in the trailers, but because it turns out that the Scotsman and Scottish history is filled with abolitionists who really actually supported and helped America in its anti-slavery movement. And again, we took the courage to take it from youth performing it to adults performing it. And I have some fun stories about how we've really faced some systemic changes. But in this process of writing it, I'll leave you with one thing on this particular background of the writing of Henry Box. There are these wonderful documentation of enslaved people who are still living or were living, and in the 1920s and 30s, their testimonials were documented in what's called slave narratives. And what's incredible is that these actual testimonials were dismissed as folklore and not as fact. So again, every opportunity America has had to embrace its own history has been sidelined with so-called, clearly revisionist history. And so I found that to be incredible. And so when we dug up the stories, we found that they came with music. So we have been embraced by Black churches for the last 20 years. It was not hard at all to take our own mediocre tunes and turn them into 7-part harmonies. And it was certainly not hard to find the great Negro spirituals and find ways to sew them up together and represent them through this theater experience. So that's the journey of Henry Box Bound so far.
It's incredible. And you talk about the music. Some of the music I had to actually research myself to know that it wasn't music that was written a long time ago, that some of the songs that were original, because it really, you have a great team who obviously wrote in that style. I want to answer, what could you tell us about what is it that makes people connect with the story of Henry Box Brown? Why is it relevant to today? Why is it captured so many people's imagination, do you think?
Yeah, well, thank you all for having us here. I'm so happy to be here. I think just in a nutshell, it is the story of the triumph of the human spirit that just universally we can all relate to. Someone being in that situation, the desperation, the assaults of his humanity, and to be able to find a way to get out of that situation, as desperate as it was, even through that trauma. So I think that is one thing that people can relate to be able to overcome something that seems insurmountable. And I think theater in general is such a communal experience. We're all sitting there together experiencing this story as human beings. It seems like a passive kind of experience, but it really isn't, because the words have energy. The words are powerful. The music is powerful. The story is powerful. And so as we're sitting there in theater, which to me is a lot like being in church, which I like to give as my credit for my even going into theater, excuse me, being in church. And if you've ever been in a Black Baptist church, It is spiritual theater to the highest degree. And as a little 5, 6, 7-year-old sitting there, listening to the music, watching the women in all of their glorious outfits. My mom would prepare her outfit the day before from head to toe. And just sitting there, the music, the emotions. So theater creates that kind of environment. And it gives people thought. You know, we say in children's theater, theater for moral reasoning, right? It helps us to think, it helps us to analyze, it helps us to experience these things as human beings, and it gives us thought. It's very vibrant, it's very alive, and it opens up a space, especially when you have a subject matter that seems very dark or is very dark and sad and just horrible. It opens a space for conversation, you know, when we've gone through that story. And that's one of the things that we do with Henry Box Brown. We then engage our audience in the conversation about that dark history and how we can all work together to make sure we don't repeat that dark history, and how we need to look at each other as human beings, as one human family. I'm also a Baha'i, and that's the foundation of the religion. One human family, one humanity, one earth, one God, one religion. You know, so it's been my, you know, pleasure. I've been, you know, in this business for over 40 years, on Broadway, TV, film, and everything. But when I became a teaching artist, working with children, it just did not compare to the accolades of a Broadway bow. I mean, it just watching children, like you were saying, Payam, to really pull out from them what's already there. You know, you give them some techniques, you know, you talk about their voice, you talk about how to do a certain thing, right, technically, and then you let them go with it. You let them find their own imaginations and their own thoughts, and you just pull all of that genius out of them. So, you know, theater is just an incredible spiritual experience, and I liken creativity to a spiritual experience as well, because we are all creative beings, created by the ultimate creator, so to speak, whatever you call that energy. And some of us write it, some of us paint it, some of us sculpt it, you know, some of us, you know, clean our house in a certain way. It's all creativity.
And if Nancy, you should also add some of the important role that you've played, if you don't mind, Ian, if you still have time. One of, you know, obviously Nancy has a formidable background in all things theater, film, television, but we realized in this journey that it wasn't good enough just to put on, forgive me for saying, a dog and pony show and think we've actually accomplished some kind of race amity, that the real dialogue is inextricably linked to empathy, and beyond the dialogue with the audience, with beyond the dialogue even with, I don't know if your viewers are getting that we started out as a children's theater, ended up producing an adult touring company, realizing we could reach a lot more children and family through that parallel sort of, we have a branding crisis, but it's certainly important for us to get to every school in America and hopefully continue the adult productions, but the youth as well. But Nancy brought in a very, very important role in this process, because for me, it was the interaction between past and present, tradition and experience that's sort of shaping our consciousness and our cultural identity and our worldview. But Nancy got to take us a little deeper, because we realized something else was happening that was not what we wanted from our own ensemble. Nancy, do you mind sharing a little bit about that role?
Oh, yeah, right, Mayor. Just the subject matter alone, right? And I was sharing with Mayor that there's, you know, real possibility of the African-American cast and the white cast in a more subtle way, sort of being re-injured by this trauma when you are embracing the role of a slave, of an enslaved person. And we know from the author, Dr. Joy DeGruy, her work on post-traumatic slave syndrome, right? And it's, you know, theater, most actors think, well, you get a script, you learn the lines, you get on stage, you do your job. And that's true, essentially. But I think we needed to take it another level deeper because of the subject matter. And so we developed a process where we talked about the subject of race and racism in America with the Black and white cast, and how it impacts us today, how it impacts white people and Black people. And, you know, it was very eye-opening for a lot of our white cast to know that there was only one race. I mean, some of them thought that, you know, there were different races because that's what we have been taught, right? And just, you know, understanding the importance of history, you know, and knowing our history and facts, and being able to have these really honest conversations in a space of love and respect. And so we thought it was really important to develop that kind of dynamic between the cast to not just help the actors individually, but to really enhance the performance of the piece on stage, and to eliminate as much of that micro passive aggressive kinds of feelings that might happen. You know, it might come up, you don't even know why you're feeling angry towards someone, you know, after you've been enslaved and they've been played your slave master, and, you know, all of a sudden you're looking at that actor like, you know, with these weird feelings. So, you know, we took it to that next level of always having a session to talk.
Wow.
You know, really go deeper.
I did once wonder about that, Nancy, because I read that you do a lot of work with the actors, preparing them, and after, and it kind of rang a bell with me that I've done a lot of work with survivors, preparing for them when they share their testimonies. And there was a bit of me thinking that I know from the experience of survivors, it's a very emotionally draining thing to tell your story. And I thought, I can imagine putting yourself in the shoes of these people, how emotionally draining that can be, and to remember how you actually switched off as being that character and not taking it into your relationships with others, or how you interact off stage. So it's amazing to hear that you do that work with them.
We had a real crying session one day on stage after rehearsal. We were all backstage, the Black actors and then the white actors came on, and we just had one big crying session. It was healing, you know, there were healing tears, and it was really just a bittersweet kind of thing. But in that moment, there was real bonding that took place, and it just sort of uplifted the whole dynamics of the relationships between the Black and white actors. It was really quite wonderful.
It's quite inspiring. And just as I was saying at the beginning there, I think people really, if you can get an opportunity, please go and watch Henry Box Brown, because as I said, it is a journey. You really do identify with the people, with the characters, and many of them go through a real challenge to their conscience. And you know how difficult at that time it was. You know, people who even are caught up in the whole slavery area, how it is to break out of that, and how it is to challenge the system. It's such an incredible story. And when we think of today, I think just taking it back to today, and we're talking about the moral reasoning and where we want people to get to is you know, Maya, you were talking a little bit at the beginning about that, is that, you know, even in Scotland, we're having a debate just now about our curriculum, and that where is Black history in our curriculum even here? I know you talked about, you know, Scotland and UK has been, you know, in some ways, maybe been a little bit more positive in some ways, challenging abolition, but we still have, we're still tainted by the slave trade as well. We're still having a big debate just now about, do we take down the statue of Henry Dundas, which is very prominent in the centre of Edinburgh. Very, very tall statue that everybody sees. Why does this person have that, who delayed slavery by so many years? You know, I wonder, what do you think people can learn from Henry Box Brown today? What is the message that you want people to leave with?
I mean, for me, it is the real confronting that, first of all, as human beings, we have a capacity to transcend, and that we are actually noble beings, and that we can look at this history and look at our ancestors and consider their gifts. It seems to me that through these stories that are very sort of, you know, if we use the African storytelling tradition, the griot is a traditional storytelling we use in our script, but they kind of remind us of our ancestors and what would they be saying, and the gifts that they are trying to impart to us. And I feel like theater is a place for us to listen to multiple truths and consider, you know, again, that capacity for empathy. And so for me, it's really, if we just look at the history of theater and the idea that it started in both the Egyptian and the Greek traditions in democracy, that democracy fell upon theater as a way to solve its own deeply rooted divisions and wars right there in like Pisces 560, you know, and the idea that we could stage the opportunity for us to hear and listen to each other. One of the exercises we use in our preparation is a yes, no, maybe game. And I love to do it with anyone because it's so quick and it creates a safe space for dialogue. And we don't ask, it's a simple statement, but it seems, you know, deviously simple, but it's something like, education is the answer to racism. And I would, hold on again, Alexa, turn off the alarm. Oh my God. So education is the answer to racism. And we'll ask a group of people to say if they feel it's a yes or no or maybe. Right here in this group, raise your hand if you think education is the answer to racism. Yes, no, maybe.
Partly.
Okay, great. Yeah, partly, right? And some people don't think that education is the answer to racism. Is that you? Where's Professor and Nancy standing?
Yes, I'm a maybe. I'm a maybe because
you're maybe. Okay.
They have.
Okay.
For that, yeah.
Yeah. So once we hear from the crowd, a group of people will say yes and no and maybe. They'll go back in their group and they'll discuss it. And what's magic about that simple statement is that when you hear the multiple truths, when you hear the different variations on what is education and what kind of answers do we get from it, and how come if we had education, why didn't it fix us up now? So this to me is one of the great opportunities that the theater allows us to ask and to create a safe space for that conversation to happen. So for me, what our takeaway from this Henry Box Brown experience is really to do a whole lot more listening and leaning in and then reflecting. And then for me personally, action has to be upon reflection and reflection has to be upon action. And I really appreciate the world's sort of response to education, as you said, in school systems, really. Those are the action. We've done the reflecting, we've done the praying, we've recognized our capacity to transcend and our nobility, and now what is the action? So that, for me, is where theater can mobilize and inspire people to action.
Wonderful. And I'm looking forward to having an extended interview with you both, and we'll find out more about the moral reasoning and the fantastic theatre work that you're doing and with these shows. Wonderful, wonderful. Now, just moving on to speak to Joe now. Joe is going to be introducing us to a wonderful interview that he was doing with Dan Moss recently. Can you tell us about that, Joe? You may need to unmute yourself first.
Yes, I will. But first, I just have to thank our guest. Your comments today have deeply, deeply affected me. It reminds me of something Payam said in answering the question from Nassim about, do you influence the children or do they influence you? Do you pour something in or do you take something out? The word education, the field that I was involved in for 40 years, comes from the Latin term educare. And educare means to extract, to find the gold within every human being and extract it. Well, today, you've raised my sights in terms of faith. So I thank you all. It reminds me of that wonderful quotation by Dr. Martin Luther King, the long arc of the moral universe always bends towards justice. And today you've brought us closer to justice with your beautiful words.